Comics that I've been reading lately. I've read Buzzing because Ry Hickman, who did the art for Bad Dream, A Dreamer's Story, also worked on this graphic novel. It's about a kid with OCD navigating the world, and his intrusive thoughts are represented by buzzing bees around his head. I read some Super Sons as prequels to the Son of Kal-El comics we're discussing tonight. I read a new Harley Quinn issue by Teenie Howard and Sweeney Boo because Tim Drake is in the comic. The cover is an homage to Tim Drake's first comic arc he ever appeared in, Batman: A Lonely Place to Die. I read some of Alyssa Wong's Captain Marvel run. They're the writer for November's Comic Club Spirit World, and also sold by anything. I'm also sold by anything with the Jen Bartel cover. I reread Amazing Spider-Man 657 because I'm a masochist who loves to cry. It's set at a time when Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, has just died, and it's an issue where Spider-Man and the remaining Fantastic Four members are telling stories reminiscing about Johnny. And then at the end of the issue, the Fantastic Four show Spider-Man a part of Johnny's pre-recorded eulogy, specifically talking to Spider-Man. And every time I read that message, Johnny leaves Spider-Man, it tears my heart open. Dan Slott's writing here perfectly captures what underneath all the bravado and cheeky quips Johnny makes, what Johnny actually cares about. And Johnny so perfectly seeing what Spider-Man is like and what Spider-Man is going to think when his friend dies. It's just beautifully heart-wrenching. My favorite comics are the ones telling the quiet human moments between all the big battles and the soap opera. There's Mystique's story Tribute the Third from X Factor Annual 6, recently republished in 2024's X-Men The Wedding Special, where Mystique is spreading a loved one's ashes. Uncanny X-Men 297, where Jubilee teaches Professor X, who has regained use of his legs for one more day, how to skate. And there's this issue, Amazing Spider-Man 657. At our Comic Book Club 2024, July, Superman Son of Kal-El 2021, issues 1 to 6, starring John Kent. Trigger warnings include child endangerment, child abandonment, school shootings, homophobia, racism, and general ignorance as topics that may get discussed. Moving on to the writer of these comics, Tom Taylor. Tom Taylor, you know who he is by now. He's a Melbourne-based writer of the September 2021 comic cast book Suicide Squad: Bad Blood, writer of both the Nightwing book and the current Titans comics featuring Nightwing, which we'll cover in the October Comic Club. He wrote the Injustice tie-in comics, and he wrote the original run of the Elseworlds comic Dark Knights of Steel, reimagining Batman and Superman's worlds as being set in a high fantasy setting, and other non-Big Two books like Seven Secrets and Neverlanders. Tom Taylor also co-created and is one of the writers on The Deep, a CGI animated television series based on the comic book of the same name, also written by Tom Taylor, published by Gestalt Comics. The series was optioned by Technicolor and produced by a Stark production of Australia and the Canadian animation studio Nerdcorps Entertainment. Commissioned by ABC, it premiered on 7/2 on the 1st of December 2015 and began broadcasting in Canada the following month. There are 65 episodes airing in over 130 territories so far. In 2015, Tom talked about how historically in American comics, comics haven't been for kids. They've been aimed at white men aged 18 to 45 as the target demographic. It's worth the caveat here that he's probably talking about post-Stan Lee books, because prior to Stan Lee, comics were exclusively seen as a thing for kids and the uneducated. Tom says, fortunately, this is changing, and 48% of comic readership are women. The amount of women working in comics has increased in the last decade, and there are now comics written for women, and comics in general are for everybody. Today's Comic Club was Tom Taylor's second time writing a aged-up John Kent Superman, having previously used the character in his deceased comics in an alternate continuity where the original Batman and Superman have died and the world has been taken over by zombies, so John and Damian Wayne took up the mantles. John Timms, the main artist for issues 1 to 3 and 5 to 6. John Timms, based in Costa Rica, has been an inker, penciler, colorist, and cover artist, primarily for DC and occasionally for Marvel. Their Marvel work has included Inhumans, Attilan Rising, and Nova. Their DC work has included the 2022 Batman Incorporated comic run, more than 40 issues of Harley Quinn across both the 2014 and 2016 comic runs, a handful of the 2018 Superman comics, run issues, and was one of the main artists working on 2019's Young Justice series with Brian Michael Bendis, a name you might recognize from the Miles Morales comic club we did. Their most recent work is the Absolute Power Super Sun one-shot about John Kent and working on Action Comics 1060 through 1063. When asked for a statement when Superman Son of Kal-El issue 5 was announced, John Timms said via statement, "I'm incredibly honored to be working alongside Tom on the Superman Son of Kal-El series, showing John Kent tackling his complex modern life while also saving the world from its greatest threats, villains, and menaces." Daniele De Nicuolo, the penciler for issue 4, is an Italian artist, using he/him pronouns, who has worked with Tom Taylor on Nightwing's issue 98 and 113 at DC, so is co-creator alongside Taylor of Dixel the Night Mite, an imp version of Nightwing from the Fifth Dimension, and was co-creator on Taylor's Boom original series, Seven Secrets. Other work for DC includes select DC-verse Vampires, the Night Terrors Nightwing miniseries. They also did the artwork on the majority of the Speed Force Volume 2 issues that released in the first half of 2024. Their career in the American industry began with a tie-in issue of Mirror's Edge for Dark Horse while they were in contact with Boom Studios. And once the first issue from Dark Horse came out, Boom commissioned him to do a few pages in a Power Rangers-related miniseries. Since then, Daniele has worked extensively for Boom on their various Power Rangers comic lines. They've done a small amount of work for Marvel, including a couple of the West Coast Avengers Volume 3 issues, and thus are credited as co-creators alongside Kelly Thompson of Jeff the Landshark, who has since become the star of his own digital Marvel Infinity Comics series. Their art has also appeared in variant cards for the Marvel Snap game. Daniele read tons of comics as kids, looking at drawings that made him travel in his imagination. Daniele grew up mostly reading manga, visible in his work. Manga artists like Eiichiro Oda, Masashi Kishimoto, Otomo, Shinichiro Watanabe influenced Daniele's styles and stories. They also read some Marvel when he was a kid, but really started reading comics in his early 20s and started going to a comic book store in Milan. On the Western comic side, artists like Stuart Immonen, who worked on various Ultimate comic books, Cory Walker, who was the original Invincible artist, Ryan Ottley, the second main Invincible artist who's done a lot of amazing Spider-Man comics, and Roger Ibanez, an amazing Spanish artist, have been a great inspiration that has helped shape Daniel's style. When discussing how drawing comics should appear to the reader, Daniele said, "The clarity of what happens in the pages and calibrated bounce from one to the other are really important elements to me. Comics are not only beautiful art, but they are also a story. You may have a great artist drawing a comic, but if you can't figure out what's going on the page, it's useless." My teacher used to say that a page, or even an entire book, should be understandable without bubbles, and that's something that challenges me all the time. I think it's a great way to cope with my job, trying to improve every time. Comics that Daniele has enjoyed include Once and Future, Something is Killing the Children, The Weatherman, Suicide Squad, and The Promised Neverland. So I had originally planned on also doing a quick bio about Gabe Eltaeb, who is the colorist on the first 4 issues of this run because he's worked in comics for a while. Then I started researching. So these were Gabe's final issues with DC. For legal purposes, I'm going to say all of the following is alleged to have happened, but I've cobbled this together from various reputable sources, articles, and in some cases from Gabe's own website. Gabe, a self-identified, proud American comic book artist and writer, was assigned to the Superman Son of Kal-El book, being told this was the opportunity to be an artist on a Superman comic. After he'd been assigned, DC announced they were taking Superman in a left-leaning direction. Gabe considered them replacing Truth, Justice, and the American Way with Truth, Justice, and a Better Tomorrow, plus the content in the issues he worked on, anti-patriotic. So boiled down, Gabe was already uneasy with the refugee immigrant storylines and the upcoming queer story under the guise of them being anti-patriotic. Gabe's original plan, he decided, was to finish his current contract and then go separate ways from DC. But a few days after sending his notice to DC, he commented, and by commented, we mean Gabe did a 4.5 hour homophobic livestream rant on the YouTube video of a MAGA supporting comic artist, the same one who started the rumors about Superman going gay, when Superman Son of Kal-El was preparing to publish its second issue, causing DC to go into a PR crisis mode and announce integral plot points for issue 5 ahead of time as the rumors gained wide traction. Gabe said he was tired of wokeness in Marvel and DC Comics and didn't like the new direction of Superman. In later interviews, he's expanded on this to heavily imply he doesn't think it matters to tell stories that highlight people of color, and especially not people with non-heterosexual orientation, and doesn't like that the big two are telling stories where white men are shown as stupid or evil or toxic. Gabe places great importance on integrating his morals into his work. He believes that art is a gift from God, and that it would be unethical to create art that teaches evil lessons. He doesn't want to contribute to creating art with negative morals that may subconsciously convince people that these are good things to believe in practice. Unsurprisingly, DC Comics the very next day informed Gabe that they didn't want him finishing his contract, and they bought out the remainder of his contract. Which, considering what happens in issue 5, DC very narrowly dodged a very messy bullet. Gabe now exclusively works for alt-right comic creators. His most recent work including a comic collaboration with NRA member and Trump supporter Dean Cain, who rose to fame in the 90s show Lois and Clark. Ironically, the comics that inspired Gabe to want to get into comics was Jim Lee and Chris Claremont's X-Men issues. Someone spent a little too much time hyper-focused on the art and missed the glaring woke messaging of the X-Men, I think. DC quickly hired Hi-Fi Design as a replacement colorist. Hi-Fi Design isn't a person, it's actually a coloring studio co-founded in 1998 by Brian Miller and his wife Christy as a studio for teaching the art of digital coloring. They have co-written instructional books on the subject while taking on regular work with various comic book publishers. The studio employs many flatters and colorists who work under the name Hi-Fi. Who is Clark Kent Superman? Before we can answer who John Kent is, I need to ensure that everybody has a base understanding of who Clark Kent is. I'm going to be super brief on this. One assumes when most people rock up to a comic club, you have a basic understanding of who possibly the most iconic character in comic books is. Just in case anybody has lived under a rock, Superman first appeared in Action Comics issue 1, dated June 1938, but published mid-April 1938. Created by writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster, Superman was born on the fictional planet Krypton with the birth name of Kal-El. As a baby, his parents sent him to Earth in a spaceship shortly before Krypton was destroyed in a natural disaster. His ship landed in the American countryside near the fictional town of Smallville, Kansas. He was found and adopted by ordinary human farmers, Jonathan and Martha Kent, who named him Clark Kent. Clark began developing various superhuman abilities powered by Earth's yellow sun, such as incredible strength and impervious skin. His adoptive parents advised him to use his powers for the benefit of humanity, and he decided to fight crime as a vigilante. To protect his personal life, he changes into a colorful costume and uses the alias Superman when fighting crime, wearing the insignia of the House of L on his chest, which resembles the letter S. His full name in Kryptonian being Kal-El. As an adult, Clark resides in the fictional American city of Metropolis, where he works as a journalist for the Daily Planet. Superman's supporting characters include his love interest, eventual wife, and fellow award-winning journalist Lois Lane, Daily Planet photographer Jimmy Olsen, and editor-in-chief Perry White, and his enemies include Brainiac and arch-enemy Lex Luthor. While Action Comics continues to this day as Superman's primary comic book, in 1939, due to the character's popularity, a second comic line called Superman was launched. Between 1986 and 2006, this title was retitled The Adventures of Superman, while a third new series called the title Superman. However, in 2006, The Adventures of Superman returned to being called Superman after the third concurrently running Superman comic book was cancelled after 228 issues. Superman decided that the time had come to drop the facade of Clark Kent and reveal his secret to the whole world in 2019's Superman issue 18. reasoning that all the people in Clark's world were also involved in Superman's and were targets anyway at this point. While Superman's outed identity remains for the duration of these comic issues discussed tonight, in Action Comics 1050 from Philip Kennedy Johnson, Tom Taylor, Joshua Williamson, and others, Lex Luthor co-opts the hypnotic power of Manchester Black on a global scale, killing the former foe-turned-Superman ally, making the entire world forget that Clark Kent is Superman. Save for the Kent family, protected by the Kent Farm's built-in shields, as well as the majority of the DCU's heroes, who all had psychic blocks thanks to training by the Martial Manhunter. Now, the ongoing hypnotic suggestion makes anyone reject any pictures or media about Clark as Superman, and any new confession of the truth could cause severe brain injury. But these comics, as I mentioned, happened prior to that time. So Clark Kent has had various children across various different realities and Elseworlds, and would, in the main continuity, adopt 2 additional children in addition to John. But for the purpose of tonight's comics, we're going to be keeping a tunnel vision focus on the child who was the star of this month's comic club. John Kent, a comic history so far. John Kent, created by Dan Jurgens, the half-Kryptonian, half-human son of Clark Kent Superman and Lois Lane, has kind of been born at least twice in comic books. His first appearance and first birth in Convergence Superman issue 2 in July 2015. Convergence is one of the most confusing DC Universe reboot events to exist, which is saying something by DC Reboot Universe standards. Basically, during the events of Convergence, there are a bunch of cities located inside bubbles, which are from different eras of DC Comics, all of which have been erased by various DC Universe reboots over the decades, including New 52, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Flashpoint, Final Crisis, Infinite Crisis, etc. Set up as a way to revisit characters and versions of characters lost to past reboots. It was set up as a filler event to cover 2 months of publishing while DC moved offices IRL between cities. It also served as a reminder of everything people loved about the pre-52 era of DC Comics, prior to the DC Universe Rebirth era, which merged the New 52 era with the expansive pre-52 era, so characters' old backstories and histories were restored. Jonathan Samuel Kent's parents named him in honor of his grandparents, Kryptonian scientist Jonathan Kent and human military general Samuel Lane. Dan Jurgens described John as looking like Clark but has Lois's Spitfire attitude and inquisitiveness. Lots of people might expect John to be something like his dad's younger self, but it would be a bit of a mistake. His parents are not Jonathan and Martha Kent, it's Lois and Clark. They're different people with different ways of parenting. Following Convergence, John appeared in the 8-issue comic book series Superman, Lois and Clark as a child who begins to develop superpowers of his own. In the DC Rebirth era, a continuity established by DC's company-wide relaunch of its comic books in 2016, John appears with his parents in Action Comics and Superman when his father becomes the new Superman in DC Comics. John's origins are retconned in the story arc Superman Reborn. In the 4-part story, 2 different versions of Superman and Lois Lane, the New 52 and post-Crisis versions, are merged into one complete version, creating a new DC universe and a new origin story for John, seen in full at the start of the first issue of this comic book club. In 2016, John was introduced as the latest Superboy in Superman Volume 4, Issue 6. Previous Superboys included young Kal-El and Connor Kent of Young Justice fame. The John Kent Superboy co-stars with Damian Wayne, aka 13-year-old Robin, in the Super Sons comic books as a 10-year-old Superboy, and the sequel series Adventures of Super Sons in 2018, and the Challenge of the Super Sons in 2020, and the 2022 one-shot Superman and Robin special, all written by Peter J. Tomasi. It's the ultimate example of, because of our dads being friends, we have to learn to tolerate one another, which does eventually grow into actual friendship. In the New 52 and DC Rebirth eras, the character Jor-El, aka Clark's father, was revised to still be alive, having been kidnapped from a crumbling Krypton in the 2017 Doomsday Clock miniseries by Watchmen's Dr. Manhattan. In the Brian Michael Bendis 2018 Superman series, when John's grandfather Jor-El visited the Kent farm, he offers to take John on a trip to better educate him about the known universe. Lois and Clark initially refuse, but John reveals his fears and insecurities to his parents, and this could be an opportunity to understand himself better. Lois agrees to go with them. While Lois soon returned to Earth, feeling she was merely holding her son back due to her own lack of powers, John and Jor-El traveled through space for some time until their ship suddenly fell into a black hole. John found himself on Earth 3, where he was quickly taken prisoner by Ultraman. Just to be clear, Ultraman has nothing to do with the Japanese science fiction media franchise of the same name. DC's Ultraman is an evil equivalent of Superman from a parallel Earth. He is a member of the crime syndicate, an evil version of the Justice League that terrorizes its Earth. After being imprisoned and depowered inside a volcano for years, and after having to fight off evil superpowered versions of both of his parents, John was eventually rescued by Jor-El and sent back to Earth, finding that while 7 years had passed for him, only a few weeks had passed on Earth since he had left. To say that a very vocal contingent of the fan base was displeased with his age up and the fact that it wasn't immediately reversed is an understatement. Many still haven't come around to John not being a 10-year-old, and there's still the possibility with any given universe reboot they could revert him back to that age, wiping away years of personal growth, including the journey we discussed today, in the name of de-aging their main characters again. DC certainly has that track record of de-aging or erasing characters entirely to re-establish a status quo. I think it is worth pointing out, though, that they keep using this aged-up version of John Kent in comic books, suggesting that sales with this version of the character beg to counter some of the vocal fan base. In 2019, John Kent joined the Legion of Superheroes in the 31st century in the comic book series Legion of Superheroes by writer Brian Michael Bendis and artist Ryan Sook. It's a tradition for members of the super family to end up in the 31st century, including Kal-El as Superboy. For those who listened to last month's Comic Club, it's during this period that John meets Nia Nal, aka Dreamer's descendant, Nura Nal, who provides John with the gloves to give to Nia the first time Nia and John meet, which will help Nia channel her powers. Plot Summary. Issue 1. Truth, Justice, and a Better Way. Trivia. The main cover for Superman, Son of Kal-El Issue 1 is an artistic homage to Clark's Superman Issue 1 cover from 1939. John Kent's birth, shown in flashback, is retconned for being born during an alien strike on Prime Earth. Without necessarily making a big deal of it, Taylor structures the story to introduce John to three of the biggest elements of Clark's tenure as Superman: the Justice League, the military, and in John's case, Damian Wayne rather than his father Batman. Each allows John an outlet to explore to readers his worldview, the expectations brought upon him, and how his sense of agency is developing behind the iconic S or L shield. This new depiction of John's birth features Clark, Lois, Wonder Woman, and Batman. John notes that 4 of the greatest heroes in the world were there for his birth, communicating the scale of expectations upon him, as well as helping endear him to readers. It's always endearing when someone considers their mum their hero, even more so when putting their non-superpowered mum on the same pedestal as the trinity of heroes that define this universe. We do also get brief appearances by the John Stewart version of Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter, as well in the first third of this comic. From there, Taylor aims to recapture the charm of 10-year-old John, who fans fell in love with in Super Sons, trying to show John as friendly, thoughtful, compassionate, and aware that people want him to live up to the name of Superman. John approaches it with an earnest intention to do his best, setting him apart from many angsty teen protagonists with the world's weight on his shoulders. So like Kal-El and like Tomasi's depiction of John, Taylor's version of John is attempting to represent the best of humanity. Arriving at a California forest fire, John assists the firefighters on the scene, teaming up with them to combat the fire. He also finds the source of the fire, a scared metahuman who can't turn off their fire-based metahuman abilities and doesn't know how they got there in the forest. The US military are trying to take out the source of the fire, but the bullets are melting before they can reach the boy. It can't be glossed over how powerful of a metaphor the central story in this issue is. When John responds to a simple problem in a forest fire, readers see him approach a real, tangible problem. Additionally, they see him literally walking through the fire to try and make things better. It provides strong imagery of compassion, and Taylor's incredibly clever to have made it one of the first things readers see John do in this series. Using X-ray vision and superhearing, John can sense fear and see the temperature is connected to the fire boy's heartbeat and racing pulse. John talks the boy through breathing techniques to help him through the panic attack the kid is having, thus extinguishing the ignition source of the fire without violence. John relays to the military that the boy's powers are triggered by his anxiety and leaves him in their care. As John takes off to help out the forest fire in other areas that had spread, with the blessing of the boy, John's superhearing picks up that they have clonked the boy on the head with the butt of a gun, not wanting to risk their people by having him conscious. When John flies back and considers taking the boy back instead of leaving him in the military's hands, the lead military personnel tell him to think hard and ask him if he really wants to go against his government. If you look carefully at the composition, penciler John Timms changes the angle from which John is viewing the military as his perspective on them moves from one of being treated as an equal to one being treated as different. The simplicity of being underneath when one feels underneath is a great nonverbal communication of intent. Leaving the boy with the military, John seeks out childhood friend Damien on the island of Corto Maltese for advice. Who is Damian Wayne, you might ask? To which I respond, to the Robin Slide, chums! The Robin Slide has been updated since you last saw it. Damian Wayne is the fifth main canonical Robin. Just to briefly recap the prior ones, Robin 1, Dick Grayson, became Nightwing. Robin 2, Jason Todd, died via a crowbar and explosion at the hands of the Joker and got resurrected by Lazarus Pit years later, becoming Red Hood, as seen in the first Comic Club of 2024. Robin 3, Tim Drake, who people in this comic read about in the Joker's Wild storyline we covered, became Robin not because he wanted to be Robin or Batman, but because he knew that Batman always needed a Robin to balance them out, and he left the role of Robin for a while, going by other names such as Red Robin. The inciting incident for Tim's first departure was his father finding out about him being Robin. During this forced retirement, his then girlfriend, Stephanie Brown, who had been fighting crime as the vigilante called Spoiler, became the fourth Robin. Mounting pressures to prove herself worthy of being Robin to Batman ended up getting her seemingly killed, though this death was later retconned as having been faked for complicated Batman reasons. Stephanie's future we'll discuss more in September's Comic Club book, Batgirls. Tim returned to the role of Robin until Damian Wayne, the biological child of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul, descendant of the leader of the League of Assassins, entered the picture. For the first handful of years of Damian's life, he was raised by the ultimate killing machine, by Talia, surrounded only by the League of Assassins. When Bruce learnt of his existence, he took over Damian's tutelage, removing Damian from Talia and the League's influence. Damian used sword as his primary weapon, unlike other Robins, and also, unlike other Robins, has a very arrogant, entitled personality, believing himself to be the best, made even more infuriating when he's sometimes right, and has a touch of aggression, though that gives him something in common with Jason, the second Robin at least. When Bruce Wayne appears to be killed in the Final Crisis event by Darkseid, after a fight with Jason over the legacy of the Cowl, Dick Grayson becomes Batman for a time. Seeing Tim Drake as an equal, he fires Tim from the role of Robin and makes Damian his protege Robin instead. Damian does also try skewering Tim through the chest with a sword when they first meet, believing his father's legacy belongs to only his biological child at the time, and Damian fans wonder why Tim doesn't treat him very nicely in the subsequent encounters for the next few years. Quickly summarized, Bruce Wayne returns from the dead, Dick Grayson goes back to being Nightwing, the mantle of Robin is currently co-shared by Tim and Damian. It's a long and complicated story. Sometimes one of them are wearing the R, depending what storylines or personal existential crises they're undergoing. Sometimes both. Both Damian and Tim also died for a little bit at various points, but we're going to sweep those deaths under the rug to be discussed another day, and we're also jumping past a couple of universe reboots for similar reasons. This issue takes place during the events of Robin 2021 Volume 3, Issue 5, a run which starred Damian Wayne in a period where he's cut ties with the Bat family and is in a death tournament hosted by the League of Lazarus, in which the greatest fighters in the world participate in order to sacrifice the winner to a resurrection Lazarus pit for a demon to bond to. Anyway, Damian confirms John's fears about the military mistreating the firepower boy are most likely valid. While they fight a bunch of ninjas, Damian also suggests John find a way to not be himself 24/7. Damian offers to approach his father about building John an alternate identity that can be used, despite his recognizability, due to Superman having come out as Clark Kent to the world. Damian understands that it bugs John to feel like there's nothing heroic about serving a status quo that only puts out the fires while ignoring the causes. Damian points out John is the son of Lois Lane, who has dedicated her life to exposing corruption and injustice, is of course going to have influenced him and will feel like he should be doing more. Damien tells John to listen to an underground stream called The Truth, which reports what others are afraid to. John wants to stand for truth, justice, and a better world to help, but doesn't want to overstep and make people nervous. Damien's parting words to John are that some people in the world can do without being nervous. It's time for John to stop fighting the symptoms when he's powerful enough to be the cure. Issue 2, The Truth Part 1. John is listening to Damien's recommended video podcast, The Truth, which is talking about a boatload of asylum seekers escaping the supposed utopia of Gomorrah and are traveling towards Metropolis. Wearing a blonde wig, John attends college under his new secret identity created by Batman and Barbara Gordon, aka Oracle, an identity called Finn Connors, traveling there in a 2003 Cord Motors Jeep. Cord with a K is referring to Ted Kord's company, who we discussed back in the Blue Beetle comic club. To rejig people's memories, Ted Kord is the second Blue Beetle, predating the third Blue Beetle, Jamie Reyes. John's secret new identity is immediately blown before he can step inside a building thanks to a school shooting. A guy with pink hair hands John back his blonde wig after the shooter has been apprehended. John flies to the moon with his car. John carrying his Jeep is an homage to the cover of Action Comics issue 1, the very first Clark Kent Superman comic. John's dad overhears the situation with superhearing, and they have a heart-to-heart on the moon. Taylor's writing analyzes the prominently asked question of, why is Superman still relevant today? He quickly follows up on John's dealing with real-world problems, as his intentions become increasingly more centered on what he can do to actually help people. This approach opts for a focused portrayal of a young man's yearning to do good in a complicated world, one with climate change, logging, inaction from selfishness, fear, division, and tribalism over borders. When John asks his father why he doesn't do more, Clark replies he doesn't feel it's his place, to which John replies, Clark is the greatest hero of the planet. If he doesn't step up, who will? Clark responds that John will, with the assistance of friends to bear the burden. He hands John a key to the Fortress of Solitude, a base in the Arctic based on Kryptonian architecture and equipped with Kryptonian technology, a new cape, and the revelation that Clark is going to need to go on a journey soon and isn't sure when he would be able to return. If he does go, he will need John to step up and look after the world. John returns home and, listening to The Truth, finds out the previously mentioned boatload of asylum seekers has run into trouble. He rescues them and deposits the boat in Metropolis. When the police try to put them in restraints and the cops try to use cameras to get John to step down, this time John stands his ground and says to remove the restraints. The police consider the optics and back down instead, still taking the asylum seekers in for processing, but without restraints. John gets down on one knee to get on the same eye level as one of the asylum seekers, a kid, and reassures the kid it'll be okay. Moving to a rooftop, John is joined by the leader of The Truth. The leader removes his mask, revealing the pink-haired guy from earlier in the issue at the college whose name is Jay Nakamura. Jay flirts with John a little, saying the wig was terrible and did absolutely nothing for John. He also understands why John would want to be somebody smaller sometimes. He also fills John in that Gomorrah, a supposed paradise having people flee the country, doesn't fit with their propaganda, especially when someone like John, with his big symbol, flies in. Jay warns John that President Harry Bendix will do whatever it takes to destroy John now. The Truth being depicted like a news-type organization is interesting because it's not clear what Taylor's going for with The Truth. While it seems to fill the role in the story as a positive, humanity-interested news source, it has all the aesthetics of a modern disinformation platform. From the ominous moral platitude it uses as its name, to a host who seems to be attempting a scary persona, to the seeming lack of a governing body attached, it doesn't seem like it should be trustworthy. While that could become a really interesting storyline about the nature of disinformation and how those who specifically struggle with making friends, the issue ending casts doubt on that direction, which seems like a blind spot when in our world it's been an identified issue in recent years that there are young men being radicalized by angry straight white male podcasters who love spewing hate, which they then take out into the real world, particularly on the women that they date. Issue 3, The Truth Part 2. The story opens with an old residential building in Coast City that starts to collapse. Clark and John Kent immediately fly in and catch the building. John x-rays the building and sees 472 people still inside. Clark tells John to save as many people as possible while he holds the building up. John saves all the people and their pets on every floor when he realizes he only has 4 seconds left before the building itself structurally collapses despite his father holding the building from the outside. Using his super speed, John manages to save everyone and gives his father the heads up to let the building go. Upon surveying Ground Zero, they find a woman called Fault Line, with amnesia including in regard to her earthquake-style powers, her unknowingly high-density body weight comparable to a neutron star, and as to how she got there in the first place. Clark and John bring Fault Line to Metropolis Star Labs, where Fault Line is placed in a zero-gravity chamber to examine her. Clark examines how he believes that Fault Line's powers can be remotely activated at will, but by whom is uncertain, concerningly. John receives an urgent text from Jay and flies away. John finds Jay at a protest rally to prevent the Gamoran refugees from Issue 2 being deported back to their home country at the request of their president, Henry Bendix. The police deem the protest an unlawful assembly and arrest John when he peacefully stands in defiance of the police along with a number of the protesters. John allows the police to handcuff him as he is sent to a nearby jail. Cat Grant, a reporter for prominent media conglomerate The Daily Planet, is there. Cat Grant is a longtime superhero character, most recently portrayed in live action in the first 2.5 seasons of Supergirl by Clarissa Flockhart, aka Ally McBeal. John states to Cat on the record that this was a political statement and that the refugees should be welcomed, seeing as his father was a refugee from Krypton and sought Earth for asylum years ago as an infant. Every story beat in this issue seems to connect to the pure of heart nature of Superman and how helping others who can't help themselves is the most important thing to do. Clark and Jay later bail John out and fly away to the Smallville farm where they are welcomed to dinner. Jay meeting Kal-El Superman is unfazed. Jay, being a reporter of the truth, meets Lois Lane and is very fazed. Clark explains he must leave for Warworld to save the planet from Mongol and the slaves that inhabit it. John and Clark embrace in a tearful goodbye and Clark flies into deep space. Later, Henry Bendix captures Fault Line and drops her from a small plane, activating her powers upon falling. She is dropped directly onto the Smallville farm, causing a massive explosion that decimates the farm and the house with everybody inside. Issue 4, Proportional Response. Issue 4 is the only issue in this trade with John Timms not on pencils, with Daniele de Nicuolo subbing in. This is common practice in comics so the main artist can get caught up on the art for the final issues in the arc. Daniel does a reasonably good job matching Tim's pencils, though the eagle art will notice the angles of the teen characters are a little sharper and the facial expressions more elastic-like, creating more animated facial expressions that, when in default positions, look a little goofy in a one-piece kind of way. While John is able to rescue his family from the exploding house, Jay can't be rescued due to Jay being revealed to have some kind of phasing abilities. The Justice League, including the Flash and Queen Hippolyta as Wonder Woman, swoop in, trying to attack the perceived threat in Flatline, who lashes out in confusion. Jay de-escalates the situation with words explaining Flatline isn't a deliberate threat and has been used. John then has a conversation with Wally. You might be wondering, who is Wally West? To which I respond, to the Flash slide, chums! You might be wondering why I'm doing this tangent now, and this is partially prep for October when we do Titans, and I suddenly have 6+ different characters that need bios. This way I can give you the cliff notes for Flash in October. The Flash is a superhero mantle created by writer Gardner Fox and artist Harry Lampert. The original Flash first appeared in Flash Comics issue 1, published in 1939. Nicknamed the Scarlet Speedster, all incarnations of the Flash possess super speed, which includes the ability to run, move, and think extremely fast, use superhuman reflexes, and seemingly violate certain laws of physics. Thus far, at least 5 different characters, each of whom somehow gained the power of the Speed Force, have assumed the mantles of the Flash in DC's history. College athlete Jay Garrick held the Flash mantle from 1940 till 1951, 1961 till 2011, then 2017 to the present day. Forensic scientist Barry Allen held the mantle from 1956 till 1985, 2008 till the present day. Barry's nephew Wally West held the mantle from 1986 till 2011, and then from 2016 to the present day. Barry's grandson Bart Allen held it from 2006 to 2007, and Chinese-American Avery Ho has held the role from 2017 to the present day. Each incarnation of the Flash has been a key member of at least one of DC's premier teams, the Justice Society of America, the Justice League, and the Teen Titans. The third Flash was Wally West, introduced in The Flash 110, in December 1959 as Kid Flash. Wally is Barry Allen, the second Flash's nephew by marriage. One day, while Wally was visiting Barry's future wife, Iris West, at Barry Allen's CSI lab at the Central City Police Department, Wally was struck by a bolt of lightning and doused in chemicals just like the Barry Allen Flash was, which infused Wally with the powers of a mysterious energy force called the Speed Force. Adopting the identity of Kid Flash, Wally maintained membership in the Teen Titans for years, meeting his best friend, the first Robin, aka Dick Grayson. Following Barry Allen's death, Wally West adopted the Flash identity in Crisis on Infinite Earths issue 12, and along with losing the Kid Flash costume, was given his own series beginning with The Flash, Volume 2, Issue 1, in 1987. Many issues began with catchphrase, "My name is Wally West. I'm the fastest man alive." Personality-wise, whereas Barry was a straight-laced forensic scientist with a dry personality that occasionally uses dorky humor to mask the pain of his dead parents, Wally West is a younger, fun-loving iteration of the Flash who cracks a lot of jokes and uses sarcastic humor, but is a bright person. Wally was also more willing to try investing time in reforming his villains, such as Pied Piper. While intelligent, Wally is a little more blue-collar of the two. Wally West was the main holder of the Flash title for 25 years. For many people, especially in this comic club's age demographic, Wally is considered the definitive version of the Flash over Barry because Wally was the Flash used in the Bruce Timm Justice League and Justice League Unlimited cartoons voiced by Smallville's Michael Rosenbaum. Wally as Kid Flash was a lead character in the 2012 Young Justice animated cartoon and a recurring secondary character in the 2003 Teen Titans animated series and its Teen Titans Go sequel. Elements of Wally's personality have been incorporated into depictions of Barry in other media as well. In 2011, during the DC 52 era, DC retconned Wally West out of existence, including Wally having ever been the Flash, in order to de-age all of their central DC superheroes. In 2014, they introduced a new version of Wally West, this version an African-American black teenager, to match the aesthetic of Keenan Lonsdale of Dance Academy fame, who was portraying Wally West in live action on the CW's The Flash and other connected Arrowverse shows. This Wally in the comics is the son of Rudy West, the older brother of Iris West, who is married to Barry Allen. In 2016, when the DC Universe brought back its pre-2011 history, it's revealed there are two Wally Wests, one the son of Rudy and one the son of Daniel West. The version of Wally that resembles Keenan Lonsdale is now referred to as Wallace, the unabbreviated version of Wally, to differentiate him from his cousin, and was brought into existence by mistake by Barry Allen's Flash when an event called Flashpoint occurred. The version we see in Superman Son of Kal-El is the version with memories of the pre-2011 comic history. This Wally is an engineer who is married to Linda Park West, and they have 3 children together, twins Jai West and Iris West II, and a younger brother, Wade West. Wally tells John about his civilian identity because he wants John to know that Wally knows what it's like to step into the boots of your hero. All the little doubts, all the ways you worry about measuring up, and that sometimes it's just nice to talk to someone else who can speak at the speed that you think. If John needs to talk, Wally's around. Ma and Pa Kent go away to stay at the neighbors and mention they keep most of their personal effects packed away. Jay introduced John to Arian Wink from the Truth Network. Long-term Comcast listeners may remember their introductory story being covered by Eto, Tom Taylor's Suicide Squad Bad Blood miniseries, when they were part of the Revolutionaries. They talk about how Henry Bendix lied, bribed, and cheated to become president of Gamora, where Jay originated. Since then, the Truth believes Gamora has been creating post-humans, experimenting on unwilling people, which Airy, Wink, and Jay all experienced firsthand. They believe Bendix attacked John's family because he saved Gamoran refugees, shining a Superman-sized spotlight on a bad regime with very good PR, and stood up and was arrested for those refugees. They hand John intel of what they know of Bendix's operations, who then takes it to his mother, Lois, to verify. Lois confirms from a reporter viewpoint it's good, well-researched work. Lois tells John to breathe and keep a level head to avoid causing an international incident. John talks to President Bendix and Gamora, and from superhearing Bendix's pulse, John can tell that Bendix is lying about the refugees being criminals. As John goes to leave, he hears a cry for help, He is lured into a trap inside a room where the refugee from the forest fire in the earlier issue is located. John is shot by a weird energy which overcharges him, sending his abilities into overdrive. He can hear everybody across the globe who is calling out for assistance. Trivia: this is the first time since she became an actual member of the Justice League that Hippolyta has been referred to as Wonder Woman. Issue 5. Who's Got You? The answer to the issue's title is J. J is John. After saving a whole bunch of people across the globe, John is getting tired, even though his abilities are still in overdrive. This is a clever turn in the story by Tom Taylor, as we already know John is a bit nervous about holding up the mantle of his father, who left Earth. There's an emotional reason as well as a physical one, since John feels like he can actually save everyone with this power boost, but it only reinforces more the hard-learned superhero lesson that you can't save everyone. Jay saves John by lending a pair of noise-cancelling wireless headphones. He sleeps off most of the effects of the beam. Waking up after 9 hours, John talks about how loud it was. He couldn't ignore everyone who needed him. Jay comments that he doesn't need John. With his powers, Jay can't actually be hurt. John feels like he has to protect the whole world, but John doesn't have to protect Jay. He's the one person in the world John doesn't have to worry about. The scene builds with tension, leading to an emotionally charged moment where John and Jay kiss, providing an emotional release from both the reader and the kissers. In an interview with Tom Taylor, he was asked if in hindsight, if there was anything he might have done differently about Superman, son of Kal-El. Tom remarked he had deadlines of when certain things had to happen, like John's bisexual coming out was to be announced via DC's Twitter on October 11th, National Coming Out Day in the US, which occurred because of leaks from within DC, which were generating rumors, a lot of them misinformed. John's bisexuality was a long-planned part of the story, a chance to make sure Clark Kent wasn't just being replaced by another straight white savior. Editors at DC were already considering similar lines of development for the John Kent character before the writer brought up the idea. Tom would have loved a little longer for John and Jay to be together before the kiss. But having said that, the importance of the moment is what Taylor considers to be more important, outweighing the slight pacing issues. When it makes global news, yes, maybe the comic could have done with 10 more pages, but sometimes you have to put the writer's cap to one side. That the comic somehow managed to keep people engaged without actually having John punch anyone for 6 issues, that's really important as well. Having a young bi guy who is just the sweetest, most empathetic, nurturing guy who doesn't want to hurt anyone is far more heroic than somebody punching a supervillain in the face. For context, it has been a steady evolution for an industry that has moved to censor itself in a number of ways. I'm of course referring to the Comic Code Authority, which set comic industry standards on practices about what comics could depict for most of the 20th century and into the early 21st century, including outlawing queer representation in comics in any way. The Comic Code was abandoned by Marvel in 2001 and in 2011 by DC and Archie Comics. Following the announcement that John Kent was coming out as bisexual, DC revealed Superman, Son of Kal-El issue 5 outsold the first issue and had to go back for a second reprinting. In addition, the first issue had to go back to the printers for a third printing, and issues 2 through 4 required second reprints as well. The issue ends with John leaving to stop a bank robbery, but promises to be back to plot against President Bendix with Jay. As another point of discussion, this issue loses points for me in one regard. This variant cover is beautiful. However, it shows them going in for a kiss, not actually kissing. And that's actually a major issue for comics in general that I think I might have discussed back when we did one for the comic clubs featuring Tim Drake. It is exceedingly common for straight characters or straight presenting couples to be seen kissing on comic covers. Down the bottom of this slide are just a handful of examples I pulled in 5 minutes of Google searching. It is exceedingly rare, on the other hand, for a comic cover to actually commit to queer couples of the same gender kissing, especially two men locking lips. And this isn't just a DC issue, it's a Marvel problem as well. Marvel's first main character, who came out, North Star, was only shown holding hands with his husband on the cover of his wedding issue, Astonishing X-Men issue 51, published in 2012. Compare this with the cover of X-Men issue 30 for Jean and Scott's wedding in 1994, see again the bottom of the slide. Similarly, Hulkling and Wiccan's wedding cover didn't have them kissing. In fact, as one of the most prominent queer couples Marvel has showcased in the last 15 years, their only cover, where they are shown kissing, has never been published because it's a digital exclusive. And the X-Men wedding special marrying two supervillainesses, Mystique and Destiny, published for Pride 2024, again only shows them going in for a kiss, no actual lip locking on any of the covers. 2022's Tim Drake Robin issue 6 is one of the only recent examples of either of the big two committing to showing two men kissing on the cover of their books. Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn, DC's most prominent queer couple, give or take some alleged straight-washing by DC in the early 2020s, have a handful, but the majority originate either from non-main universe versions of the characters, like the animated series tie-in comics, or are DC Pride covers. Anyway, the reason I bring it up isn't anything to do with the writers or even the artists, nor is it because I'm wanting everybody snogging all the time on comic covers. It's just a sign that there's still room for improvement when it comes to representation equality, when it comes to the main two, and how they portray their openly queer presenting characters alongside their straight presenting ones. Back to discussing issue 5, what are other people's thoughts about issue 5? Do you agree with Taylor that the importance of the moment outweighs the pacing? Issue 6, Beginnings. As a small production note, Superman Son of Kal-El was a monthly book, however issue 5 came out in November 2021 and issue 6 in January 2022. Homophobes took to Twitter trying to say that sales had fallen and the book had failed, making the character bisexual because Superman Son of Kal-El wasn't on any of the top 100 selling comic lists that month. Taylor clarified via social media that the reason it wasn't on any lists because there wasn't a December issue. The reason for not having a December issue wasn't specified. It's not unusual in comics. DC could have been working on contracts for replacement colorists or pencilers. The series went through a few. Could have been other writing obligations for Taylor, who was co-writing Nightwing and independent books, and probably brainstorming for the Titan series, or could have been any other number of things on the DC side of things. At any rate, the series lasted 18 issues and got a sequel pretty soon after it finished with the same writer, which is nothing to sneeze at considering the number of 6-issue miniseries without a sequel or extension DC has had in the last couple of years. John Kent, aka Superman, has been to other planets, has lived in the future, faced actual monsters and intergalactic despots, and this is about as nervous as John has ever been. Going on a date. John and Jay have a cute date eating pizza flown in by John from New York atop the iconic Golden Globe of the Daily Planet, their interaction showing the fondness and care between the two characters, like John asking Jay if he wants to share instead of demanding to find out in order to help. I will just say, at the risk of destroying the romance a little bit, realistically, that globe will be the most pollution-covered, bird poop splattered structure, though maybe John breathes really hard beforehand to blow off all the grime and dust and feces and ick off. Jay admits he doesn't know if Mum is still alive, as she never made it out of Gamora. She was the president before Bendix and Gamora, and they were separated. Bendix changed the laws of the Gamora nation, stripping the citizens' rights away, turning the people into his workforce and the country into a factory, producing superhumans. Jay was experimented on, Bendix's scientists pulling Jay apart and putting him back together again repeatedly until Jay was barely there. When there wasn't enough of Jay to hold, Jay was able to escape imprisonment and fade away from Gamora. In Metropolis, Jay infiltrates a Star Labs facility for info on who broke out Fault Line, but Damian and Lois have also broken in, all of them caring about John. They locate the footage and discover a US senator and a Gamoran ambassador to the US, and a third hooded man bust Fault Line out to use on the Kent farm. The footage links the Gamora and US governments to the attacks on the Kent farm and to post-human projects. Damian deduces that John and Jay are romantically entangled and is supportive as shown through unnatural grinning. It's a small moment, but a happy and important one, understandable to first-time John Kent readers, but also playing into their past of friendship and team-ups in a natural and heartwarming way. Jay checks with the embassy to learn the Gamoran ambassador has boarded a ship earlier in the day, and Lois is adamant about releasing the footage. John flies to the ship to hold the ambassador accountable, only to discover they've been rounding up either refugees to take back to the homeland or people who won't be missed for their superhuman experimentation. John rescues the people and apprehends the ambassador. John takes the ambassador to Jay. Jay finds out his mother, former president Sara Nakamura, is alive. We cut to President Bendix, learning the cargo was apprehended and the ambassador lost thanks to Superman. Bendix says that it's frustrating, but it won't matter much longer as The Rising is about to begin. While surrounded by powered superhumans, it's suspended animation waiting to be awoken. Next time, Giant Days, volumes 1 and 2 of the trade paperback, collecting the first 8 issues of the comic book.